Jerry Fishenden is Microsoft's National Technology Officer for the UK. You have his biography, so I'll be very brief, but it's enough to say that he's Microsoft UK's lead technology advisor and spokesman on the future of IT. And it's very much appropriate for a conference on barriers to e-government to begin, I think, with a positive conception of what it's all about. What is the potential future of e-government? And of course, there are many different scenarios about the future of e-government. But are there positive conceptions of e-government that animate us to look at the barriers? And I think Jerry's agreed to give his vision of the future of e-government. Thank you very much, Jerry.
Okay, thank you, Bill. As per the introduction, I'm Jerry Fishenden, NTO for the UK. There's more detail here deliberately to stimulate discussion for the day. I have a blog on which I discuss many of these issues and get many comments posted from people who sometimes agree and often disagree, but it's a good debating forum. So really what I wanted to look at today is how some of the new technologies around, how the so-called Web 2.0 that's currently the talk of the blogosphere, how many of those related developments are really going to potentially impact on the way we think about where the boundaries are of e-government programs and how citizens particularly fit in and enjoy the benefits of the new age of Web 2.0. I actually think there's a very powerful convergence. I mean, here in the UK we have the transformational government agenda, and we have a Prime Minister committed to citizen-centric services, and at the same time we have the Web 2.0 movement, which is very much about the consumer as creator, the consumer at the centre of everything they do and experience. So in terms of today, what's actually happening out there and what's the relevance of it to today's agenda? I see a fundamental shift in the landscape. When we talk about e-government, many people I think have in mind still web portals and online services delivered through a browser. But we're very much moving into the age of the programmable web, the internet being used as a communications carrier, a connectivity device that extends the reach of technology right the way through into our buildings, into our schools, into all the environments that we touch. It's not just about that first phase, the Web 1.0, if you like, of web portals and browser interfaces. We see a lot of agreement around some of the technical standards in this space. And in particular, there's a growing trend. Grid computing, which previously was only seen in academia, is going into the mainstream. We see many banks already using it. What's its relevance to us when we think about e-government? Well, actually, the web will become the grid, is the general prediction. That means every single device that's connected to the internet will potentially be talking to every other device on the web. A huge amount of computational resource that touches everything from large mainframes through to mobile phones in our pockets. And if we think about how e-government's going to fit into that landscape, it raises interesting questions. So today's world is one in which we see a huge explosion of the consumer as creator. Online social networks, the blogosphere itself, content sharing, podcasts. What's interesting is not just that explosion of individuality, if you like, but also the bi-directional nature of it. So almost all of these have the ability for people to feedback on their experiences. You go to blog sites, you can post comments disagreeing with what's being said. You can go to social discussion forums. These are very much encouraging an open dialogue, genuine creativity, and a new way of thinking and interacting with each other. And we're seeing this sort of move to the edge, if you like, alongside some technology changes around mesh networks, greater mobility and flexibility, and the idea that the internet is powering a whole new way of interacting with technology. When we look at some of these changes, the user at the center, you see typically on Amazon and places, people that are buying things are now actually powerful forces themselves. There are some people that are highly credible reviewers, for example, on Amazon. We see people's eBay rankings having quite a high value to them. There's quite an interesting article recently about when virtual crime in online games becomes a physical crime, because some of the value of the credits you can get in online games are beginning to have real world value. And there was recently an instance of some people in a game that set up a mafia type mob, went in and stripped another game player of all of their assets. And because they had a value in the real world, the police have been asked to look at whether a real crime has been permitted. And I think it's a very interesting question about where the boundaries of the virtual and the real world are going. So again, we see the users as producers. We see explosion of things like Flickr, IM, the like, social networking, and particularly in the tags and the tag gardens and the harvesting of tags. I'll come back to in a little while. But really this idea of being able to mark your content, being able to very quickly find the content that interests you, I think obviously has direct resonance when we look at government services. So if we look at things like Delicious, they give us a very quick flavour of what people are finding of most interest on the web. If you haven't used it, it's a way as you browse around of very quickly tagging the sites, the pages, the content that's of interest to you. You just click it, it gets stored up on Delicious. You can then go there, you can see all of the quick references to things you found of interest, but you can also start looking at what other people are currently discussing, what other people find interesting on the internet. So it's a very good indicator of the popularity of different things on the internet, but a very quick way of trying to remember all of those many things you found on the web and how you get back to them later, which is a huge challenge, I think, for all of us, given the amount of resource that's out on the web. The other approach is using RSS feeds, really simple syndication. So this is where effectively you begin to design the web the way you want to see it. In this example, these are pages I'm putting together myself. So this shows some of the feeds I'm interested in. So it's pulling in various news feeds from different magazines. I've chosen to have NASA's photo of the day, local search so I can find things of interest to me, weather forecast to see if London and Seattle continue to mirror each other's weather patterns and rain in both places at the same time. But I can also begin to build up different pages. And I thought this is where I started trying to look at how easy would it be to build a My Government web page. Well, this is currently My Government web page. Now, it doesn't look terribly interesting. And that's partly because one of the challenges I found is a lot of the current government information that's out there is really what you might call Web 1.0. It's been designed as a series of separate information sites that you can go to look for content. There's very little currently with Web 2.0 style support available on them. So I thought next stop would be to go to direct.gov, which is a very good Web 1.0 type website that aims to bring together, pull together and collate all of the information that you might find interesting as a citizen in the UK. So sort of one-stop department store with a lot of franchises inside it, so you can find the content you're looking for. And I thought this would be great. This would be really good if I could now cherry pick the things of particular interest to me and pull them into a website so that I can experience them the way I want to experience them. So I did a search on RSS feeds. I wasn't terribly precise. I came up with a lot of results. Feeding your baby, healthy eating for babies and the like, because of the word feed, which wasn't really what I was looking for at that moment in time. So I thought I'd better get more accurate with my searching and put RSS feed in as a single key search. And I came back with precisely 0 results. Well, I thought, okay, DirectGov is designed almost, as I say, as a department store with franchises. I'll go and look at one of the underlying franchises to see if they maybe expose a direct feed. So I decided to go to my local council website. Again, pretty good, sort of Web 1.0 website. Lots of useful information on local services and the like. Put in a search for RSS feed, and again, no results. Which is why that mygovernment.com page, sitting currently on my Windows Live site, has so little content on it. I haven't been able to go and pick the services of interest to me as a citizen and put them together in a way that actually makes sense for me. Yet when I look at a lot of the other sites that are developing out there in the commercial space, in the voluntary space, they are providing those type of facilities. So clearly there's a need to sort of transition from that Web 1.0, if you like, to the Web 2.0 mindset, to give us as citizens a greater degree of flexibility in the way we choose and consume those services. I thought I'd just take a quick look at some of the American sites as a sort of benchmark. I mean, indeed, some of those are RSS enabled, and I think, well, that's quite useful. But again, a lot of those focus on information services, and again, I think that's a sort of Web 1.0 type mindset where they're assuming things are only going one way. They're pushing things to me. I'd be much more interested if there was greater interactivity on these, if potentially I could just click on a link that would enable me to file my tax, or even if it downloaded some sort of small applet that would enable me to interact with a government service, a government transaction, rather than purely an information service. So I thought I'd take a look at Technorati, which is one of the big blog tracking websites out there on the internet. As you can see, I think at the day I took this, there were 44.6 million blogs being tracked, a total of 2.6 billion links in its engine. It gives you a feel, and if you go back almost every day, it seems to have leapt up by another million or so. And these are all people out there busy blogging away. They could be individuals, it could be teenagers in their bedroom updating a personal blog, or they could be organizations doing official blogs. Part of the byproduct of using that type of technology is the tag cloud. So I grabbed this off of Technorati. This shows anyone who's interested, when they look at Technorati, what I blog about. And depending on the size of the text in the tag cloud, it shows how important, how often I blog about things. So the larger the text, the more often I reference them in my postings. Now at the moment this is sort of quite interesting. I actually think the true potential goes beyond this. If this could become almost a calling card that you could present to the web and say, these are the things that interest me, and depending on their size, it shows how much they interest me. If I could do a similar thing with government services and say, actually maybe benefits is a really big interest of mine, and these particular accessibility, those types of features, and push that out and say, tell me what's available. This idea of a bi-directional service where I can say, these are the things that interest me as a citizen, post me the information you have, rather than me as a citizen having to proactively go trawl lots of websites or use DirectGov to try and find those types of service. So going a bit beyond that, I talked about the need for transactional interactions with government as well as the traditional information services. So these are the idea of gadgets, very small applications that I can either fix on my desktop or post into web pages. And they can be things drawn either locally, they could be used inside an organization. When I talk to civil servants, they're very interested about having the right visualization tools for use inside an organization. So maybe these types of real-time devices showing how many forms are being processed, where the backlogs are in their organizations, so that they can actually get a much better handle on information in real time about how their business is running inside government. If you go and look at the website, there's infinite number of these types of very small applets being created for people to embed into web pages and be used. I've started trying to home in on some that might be of interest to me. I found Transport Direct, that somebody had written a little gadget for that potentially I could then go off, find out what it did for me. I actually use Transport Direct quite a lot. I think it's a pretty useful site in terms of telling you how to get from A to B and using all sorts of options. With this gadget, I can just drop that into the web page I had earlier, or even onto my desktop potentially. And whenever I want to use that service, I can just do it there and then within the environment I'm in. I don't have to go off to the Transport Direct web page in order to interact with that service. And I think if we think about that in a wider context of all the government transactional services that I might be interested in, being able to pull together in an easy to find sort of reference site or page would be a huge benefit to me. So when I get to that end of year churn and I need to do all the different bits of online paperwork that I now have to do, it'd be nice to know I just fire up that page and it's got all of the pieces of interaction that I need to do with government. I don't need to keep hopping about and remembering where was that URL that goes to the Inland Revenue Self-Assessment Service. But I said at the beginning that this is about more than just websites. The fabric of the internet is about making use of the technology for far, far more than just government online publishing. So we're seeing people beginning to use the web for genuine new forms of collaboration and creativity. That can be in the workplace with people collaborating on development of a document. It can be people in their own time, or indeed this could be a professional group, actually using the fabric of the internet when they're not physically co-located to perform creative works or develop creative works. And it can actually be people that are co-located around the world, not co-located, actually physically located around the world. So you look at organisations like British Aerospace and Airbus, and they have a distributed operation that's right around the globe of engineers who are working together on the next generation of planes. And then within our communities, again, if this isn't just about websites, what does that actually mean for us? How can we use the internet within our communities to enable new forms of interaction and social cohesion in our communities? We hear a lot about convergence. We're beginning to see many different devices in the house coming together, making themselves available to each other so that you can pull content from one device to another. I think as time develops, we'll begin to see more collaborative neighbourhoods where potentially you can expose content you've got to the neighbourhood and vice versa. So it could be local shops making content available to you locally. It could be your neighbour making content available to you. Maybe they recorded a programme when you were away on holiday and you'd forgotten to record it. Okay, there are legal implications, but I think that's part of the discussion. It's talking about what the technology can enable. Whether there need to be legal changes and issues around copyright is another very interesting discussion. Likewise, user might just say, tell me what's in the local area, subscribe to those services, go and pick up, see who's online in the local community, depending on the social acceptability of point of presence and other things. It might even tell you, if your neighbour's currently down the pub or something and you want to pop down and have a drink with them while you watch the next stage of England's rather interesting progression through the World Cup. And then children, who actually, I'd say, don't need any encouragement. They are already making incredible use of the internet. Watching some of my teenage relatives using the internet for IMing and the like. It'd be an interesting ethnographical study, I think, on how you can actually maintain 15 different IM sessions with 15 different people and not send the wrong message to the wrong person. So I think increasingly we see the trend that information and services need to flow when needed, as needed to people. And that's true inside the organisation. If you think about government organisations, public sector bodies wanting to make sure they have better and earlier insight into key metrics about what's happening in their organisation. Between organisations, a lot of the problematic cases in the UK, particularly around children at risk, and then making sure that the right information flows adequately between them and between citizens and businesses. But then identity has already been mentioned as a key focus of the European Union, and I think quite rightly, because at the moment, to be frank, identity on the internet is a mess. It hasn't got to an identity 2.0. There's lots of work currently going on in this space about how we collectively, as an industry, can raise the barrier on identity, make sure that it's far less prone to phishing attacks, farming attacks and the like. And to me, this is the biggest challenge. I'm really pleased to see that Austria in particular, as current presidency, are taking a very active interest in EID and trying to work on some of these complex topics. And then I think data sharing goes with that. I think unless you fix identity, you can't begin to fix data sharing because you've no idea whether the right people are accessing the right information and whether the right people are then being onwardly shared with it. But I don't think it's just about the technology. The point of this slide really is to say, why can't we take something like the Creative Commons mindset and approach, which is about clarity in terms of what rights, what copyrights you may have over data you find on the internet. Because today it's typically a mess. You find some images online, and you think, well, that'd be nice to use in my presentation today, but you've no idea whether they're copyright or not. I think Creative Commons has done a great job of beginning to clarify some of those issues. What interests me, if you start looking at data protection, this is a deliberate mock-up of could you apply that same type of approach to enable people to understand better what rights they're granting people to information you provide. So this could be for me to read as a citizen. Before I give information to a government department, it just makes very clear in simple terms the extent to which that data might be onwardly shared with others. But equally, if I'm a civil servant, suddenly asked to share data I've currently got in my possession, how do I know what rights the citizen originally gave me over that? Do I have the right to share? So could we have some very simple clarity based on Creative Commons principles that would enable us to do that? If we did, then I think we can look at more technological issues, such as how we then use information rights management. Now, there's a huge debate about digital rights technologies. Today, they're typically used by media companies to try to protect their content from illegal digital copying. So you buy something online, comes down to a device, you can make 1 or 2 limited copies, and then you're stopped from doing any more copies. But if you turn that model around and say, how about if we as citizens could apply those same types of technical rights over our content and information to know that others weren't making inappropriate use of them? If we could use technology to retain control of our personal information and know who's accessing it and when. Raises interesting questions about whose data it is and the question of how citizen-centric do you want to get. Then the broader point of the internet as an enabler, I think unless we crack those other issues around security, identity, data governance, we're not going to realize the true benefits that the internet can bring. And that isn't to me ultimately about web browsers and web pages. It's about things like ambient assisted living, which is really the idea of pervasive technology being used in our homes to enable us to stay longer sitting at home, to not have to go into nursing homes or hospitals sooner than we need to. If we can really enable technology to transform our lives in that way, using the internet as the sort of backbone of enabling that type of environment to come, then I think we begin to get very interesting questions about where the barriers and boundaries are on e-government. It isn't just about services being published through a website. It's about devices that the NHS might be giving us to have in our home because it's better for me, I can stay in my home, and it's better for the NHS because it keeps me out of the care system potentially, but still being effectively monitored and tracked at home. Some people ask about the robot. This is actually one being designed for battlefield casualty retrieval, but in the States there's huge interest for this and the impact it could have, particularly on carers, particularly if a carer's looking after a relative who physically they cannot even do things like turn them in bed and stuff. So people are beginning to look at the use of robotics in the homes to assist people with things like caring. So, summary, is this a perfect storm where we're talking about a citizen-centric public policy statement and the Web 2.0 mindset and technology approach? I think it could be if we can begin to crack some of those wider issues such as identity and data sharing and governance, and I don't just mean at the technical level. So it's not just online and the web, this is about the internet as a truly pervasive vehicle for us, enabling our communities to be empowered by technology, but also the civil servants. I think very interesting when I'm doing sort of Web 2.0 updates to civil servants. They always say we want those types of tools inside our organisations to get better insight into the type of information content they have. So it's really about trying to escape the traditional thinking that we seem to have around what the internet means and what government services mean using the internet. We're seeing people being able to live and work anywhere, anytime. I was just talking about education and how challenging the future vision of what education could look like could be. With citizens at the centre, being creative, interactive, making use of pervasive technology. And then something I believe quite passionately is that we don't have sufficient engagement at the stage of policy making with what technology can actually enable. I think technology is still seen as an operational and administrative tool and not as part of an actual policy-making operation. The impact that policy and technology together could have is far more significant than a policy that then uses technology as an afterthought. And that's my very quick run through a few minor issues.